So the 78 Constitution, one of the main features about the 78 Constitution is the fact that it has an extreme power centralization, right? So as we discussed in the previous weeks, this Constitution has many positive features, but mostly the problem is the fact that President has so much power centralized on that position that simply the existence of the president compromises everything. Now, if we list things out, we have a reasonably good parliament. We have a parliament which is not weak like the Salisbury parliament, no unreasonably powerful like the National State Assembly. So it's a reasonably good parliament with 196 people elected by vote and 29 people elected from the national list, right? So it has minimized the damage of not having a Senate. Okay, so it is a good parliament, but the parliament's powers are heavily centralized simply because the existence of the president. We have a good prime minister. Prime minister's powers are compromised because of the president. We have a good judiciary compared to Salisbury judiciary, which was like completely connected to the British Privy Council, comparing to the 72 judiciary, which was basically judicial institutes being established by the National State Assembly itself. This is an excellent judiciary, and there are many steps taken to assure independence of judiciary. But there are also that judiciary's independence is violated, compromised because of the powers of the president. Same goes to the public sector. It's not like too independent like Salisbury. It's not like too politicized like 72, but so under this constitution we have a good public sector, but again because of the powers of the president, that has been compromised. Okay, so we need to have a summary, like we need to sort of like have a general note on how power centralization on the executive is happening, which basically explains why this constitution has sort of been like a bad constitution simply because of the power centralization at the executive and out of the executive also, specifically the executive president. Okay, so executive president handles most of the appointments in the public sector and judiciary. Not only that, even the prime minister and the other ministers in the cabinet. So practically the other ministers are the members of the executive. Also, the legislature is under heavy control of the president. He can appoint, he can summon, prologue, dissolve, right, and all that. So let's see how come the president is so powerful and how the power has been centralized at the position of the president. Okay, right, let's read and find out. Sarah, can you read?
The executive and the power centralization. The 1978 Second Republic Constitution is considered as a constitution which centralized the power at the executive or the two parts of the executive. Also, the power is mainly centralized at the executive president. It can be seen that the original 1978 Constitution has given a centralized, unchecked power to the president, which has allowed the president to conveniently dominate other political authorities in the system. In order to understand this power centralization at the position of the president, it is important to analyze the powers given to the president. According to the original 78 Constitution, the president of the executive is elected in an island-wide election where the entire country is considered as solitary electorate. According to the original Constitution, the president is chosen for an official tenure of 6 years. As provided by Article 31, the president holds the position of head of the state, head of the executive, head of the government, the highest commanding officer of armed forces. The president is given vast powers under the above mentioned field. This includes strong powers of the parliament, the cabinet, and calling references. Powers and tasks of the president. Powers as the head of the state, being considered as the first citizen of the Republic of Sri Lanka, carrying national events, representing Sri Lanka in international events, possessing the national seal, awarding honorary names, entering into international treaties and agreements, declaring nationally important events, addressing the nation, granting presidential pardon, welcoming and greeting foreign ambassadors, high commissioners, and other foreign delegates. Powers as the head of the executive, maintaining law and order, deciding and implementing state policies, administration of the public sector. This power includes the appointment of following functions of the public sector: President, Secretariat, the Secretary of the Cabinet, Secretary of Ministers, officers of the Foreign Service, Chairman of Government Corporations, the Attorney General, the Auditor General, the Inspector General of the Police, the Ombudsman, the Parliamentary High Commissioner for Administration, the Secretary General of Parliament, the Solicitor General, the Election Commissioner, the Public Service Commission, the Delimitation Commission, the Provincial Governor. In addition to above appointment, the President also has the power to examine and supervise the functions, the documentation, and the paperwork of any ministry or department. Also, the President has the power to appoint Presidential Investigation Commission now to investigate a certain matter. Example, the Presidential Investigation Commission of the Central Bank bond issue, the Presidential Investigation Commission over Easter attack. It can be seen that the original constitution has allowed the President to appoint all crucial positions of the public sector on his sole discretion. Therefore, the President has the opportunity to control the public sector by appointing his supporters to top positions. Also, positions such as Ombudsman, which are supposed to protect the rights of citizens, being appointed by the President on sole discretion, pose a threat on the level of human rights of citizens as well. According to the Constitution, the policies over the public sector were decided by the Cabinet. Additionally, department heads were also appointed by the Cabinet. However, since the President was the head of the Cabinet, all these actions were decided by the President himself. This allowed the President to appoint all secretaries of ministries, heads of departments, and chairmen of corporations on his sole discretion. Additionally, the Public Service Commission, which handles appointments, promotion, transfer, disciplinary actions, and terminations, was also appointed by the President himself. Therefore, it can be seen that the President, as the head of the state, has vast powers and has the complete dominance of the permanent executive of the country. Three powers as the head of the government. According to the 1978 Constitution, the President is considered as the leader who steers the entire government. Therefore, vast powers are given to the President as the head of the government in many branches of government. These powers include appointing the Prime Minister, appointing cabinet ministers, appointing state ministers and deputy ministers, appointing non-cabinet ministers, directing the Board of Ministers in policy formation, taking over any ministry from a minister, keeping any ministry in hand, deciding the relevant subject of any ministry, taking over or keeping any ministry subject in hand. Above mentioned powers clearly allow the President to be dominant over the Cabinet. The President has the powers to appoint the Prime Minister, Cabinet Minister, and other positions in the Board of Ministers on his sole discretion, and even has the power to take over or keep any ministry or subject in hand. Therefore, until the 19th Amendment, the President had complete control of the Cabinet. In practical politics, these powers were used in the parliament against the opposition party as a tool. Often it be seen the president granting minister positions to members of the opposition as a political bribe to make the governing party stronger. Also, it should be noted that the president could also use these powers to gain an advantage in cohabitation government. For example, the cohabitation government in Sri Lanka from 2000 to 2004 was toppled as a result of an elaborated plan, which included the president taking over three cabinet ministries. According to the original constitution, the president was extremely dominant at the head of the government. Even it was possible for the president to keep all the ministries in his hand. The president was solely steering the government, while the prime minister and other ministers played a very minor role in governance. Under the original constitution, the only exception where the president did not have any dominance was cohabitation governments, where the prime minister practically became the head of the government, with the president having to play a nominal role. It should be noted that even in a cohabitation government, the president is officially still considered as the head of the government. The 19th Amendment in 2015 changed it for the first time by restricting the power of the president and upgrading the power of prime minister. This created a governance system with the president and the prime minister handling a collective steering of the government. However, the 20th Amendment has reversed this up to a reasonable extent, allowing the president to have more control of the government again. Four powers as the chief commanding officer of the armed forces. The president is considered as the highest position to deliver orders to the forces of the country. This position includes certain powers as declaring war and peace, appointing the army commander, navy commander, and the commander of the air force, appointing other top positions of the forces, granting honorary medals to soldiers and officers. Five powers with regard to the parliament. Given that Sri Lanka has mixed executive system, the government includes a directly appointed president as well as a parliament. How it should be noted that with the centralization of power, the president has become extremely powerful. Therefore, the president has become a dominant figure in front of every other political authority, including the parliament as well. The constitution has given the president vast powers over the parliament, allowing the president to dominate the parliament. These powers include summoning and dissolving the parliament, calling, concluding, and postponing parliamentary sessions, presenting the policy paper of the government to the parliament, chairing inaugural sessions of parliament, visiting the parliament and joining parliamentary sessions at any time, addressing the parliament and sending messages to parliament. Out of the above powers, the powers to dissolve the parliament can be considered as one of the most important powers on the dominance of the president. The original constitution provided an exception over this power, as a newly appointed parliament could not be dissolved until it completes 1 year. This time period was increased to 4.5 years under the 19th Amendment. However, the president having the power to dissolve even a stable parliament with clear majority can be considered as an undemocratic feature. Example, in 2004, the president dissolved the parliament which had 136 seats in favor of the governing party. Powers with regard to the judiciary. As we have discussed in this unit in previous lessons, the powers of the president has posed a threat on the independence of the judiciary. The presidential powers of the judiciary include appointing the Chief Justice and the other judges of the Supreme Court, appoint the President of the Court of Appeal and other judges of the Court of Appeal, appointing judges to the High Court on the recommendations of the Judicial Service Commission, appointing members to the Judicial Service Commission. 7. Powers with regard to referendums. Referendums were introduced to Sri Lanka as a new feature of the 1978 Constitution. All the referendums are considered as a direct democratic method which upgrades the democratic status of the country. In practical politics of Sri Lanka, this feature is used to increase the power of the president by leaving the parliament out from the lawmaking process. According to the constitution, only the president has the power to call a referendum. As provided by Article 85, the President has the power to avoid the Parliament and get a certain bill passed through a referendum. This includes a certain bill once rejected by the Parliament as well. Additional referendums could be held on any matter of national importance, and determining if a certain matter is nationally important is completely up to the opinion of the President, Article 86. Practical example of referendums being used as a political tool can be seen in the political history of Sri Lanka. The only referendum to be held in the country in 1982 was used to postpone an election and extend the term of the parliament which the existing government had a favorable majority. Powers 8. Powers and emergency situations. The president has the power to declare an emergency situation in the country. Under such circumstances, the president becomes a solitary source of law which gives him the power to overrule any law, excluding the constitution, by issuing an order. In conclusion, the above-mentioned powers have centralized the authority and the dominance at the position of the president. In addition to above powers, judicial immunity the president has, which prevents the president from being sued personally or officially, has further improved the autocratic nature of this position.
Okay, right. Thanks, Sarah. That was a lot. Actually, you read a lot, quite a lot. Okay, now keep this in mind. That was a target question for this year. Okay. This could come for this year's examination, right? The power centralization at the position of the president. So because of that, you guys need to be very thorough with that. In fact, if you understood this lesson, this is not like, this is nothing, anything is new in this content. We discussed all this. It's just this note, this executive and how the power centralization works, and then it discusses how powers and tasks are given to the president in a very centralizing manner. Okay, so what you need to do right now is making a short note. Okay, what's important is, first of all, having an idea. I believe all of you all have the PDF of this note, right? The executive and the power centralization, that you need to give a brief introduction as to how the power is centralized, how the president is given all these 4 positions and all that. Then you need to list out the powers and tasks of the president and how in different aspects the president is given the prominent position. First, powers as head of the state. Second, powers as the head of the executive. Third, as the head of the government. Then fourth, powers as the chief commanding officer of armed forces. 5, powers with regard to the parliament. Then 6, powers with regard to judiciary. Then powers with regard to referendums. Powers with regard to emergency situations. Right? Those 8. If you can write a 9th one, which is not included here. Powers with regard to the public sector. Of course, like we've included that, we've incorporated that under powers as the head of the executive. But you can write a separate one if you want, as the powers as the permanent powers with regard to permanent executive, and you can take this administration of the public sector part separately to that if you want. Okay. Anyways, what you need to do is you need to put a small short note for this page, and then you need to remember these 8 factors I told you, powers as these 8 aspects. And if you recall those 8 by memory, these you can think and write. You can, with your general political science knowledge, you can think what are the things that would come under the head of the state. What are the things that should come under the head of the executive, right? So you remember these 8. So write each of these down, write a couple of powers that come under that, and make that a short note that you should study, because this is a target question for this year. Okay. Doesn't mean others are not target questions. Sometimes you make this mistake. You just, the moment I say it's a target question, you only study that. Don't do that. Okay. It just given the pattern of the papers, it's most likely that this question may come this year. Okay. So I shall give you some time, right? You make the short note, then we'll get into each one by one and we'll have an explanation. Okay. Right. So we need to be studying about the executive's power centralization. So as you can see, the 78 Constitution has centralized all the powers of all institutions at the executive alone. Okay. So executive also has 2 parts. As you know, you have a president as well as you have a prime minister and a cabinet. So out of that also, president handles most of the powers. So, as provided by Article 31, it says that president holds all these positions: head of the state, head of the executive, head of the government, highest commanding officer of armed forces, right? And all that. So let's see why the president is so much centralized in terms of powers. Now, first of all, as a head of the state, the president is considered as the first citizen of Sri Lanka. He has to chair the national events. He represents the Sri Lanka in international events, possesses the national seal, avoiding honorary names. So he is literally considered as the first citizen of the country. He is prioritized over everyone else. There are certain privileges the president gets as the head of the state. Now, keep in mind, a prime minister in a cabinet system won't get this. When we had the cabinet format in Sri Lanka, all these went to the nominal president or the governor general, right? So the president gets all these as the head of the state. Then as the head of the executive, maintaining law and order, which means handling the police force, deciding and implementing state policies. That means as the head of the cabinet, right? Then administering the public sector, there's appointing all these top positions like the president secretariat, cabinet secretary, ministry secretaries, officers of foreign, like these embassies and high commission officers and all that, right? Attorney General, Auditor General, Inspector General of Police, all these top positions, all these positions are appointed by the president on his own. Okay. So also the president has a power to appoint presidential investigation commissions. Now you see that when the whole central bank bond scam issue came, the president appointed a commission. And when the whole Easter attack situation came out, the president came and appointed an investigation commission to check about what's happening with Easter attacks. Okay. And of course, when it comes to human rights and all those things, president has a duty to protect those. So all those powers come into the hands of the president. And the Public Service Commission, which handles appointments, promotions, transfers, disciplinary actions, and terminations, that commission is also appointed by the president. So president indirectly handles the public sector's positions as well, right? Then as a head of the government, president gets to appoint the prime minister, appoint the cabinet ministers, appoint state ministers, deputy ministers, non-cabinet ministers. Then he gets to direct the policy formation, He gets to keep any ministry in his hand, right? He gets to decide what subject should go into which ministry. So practically, he has like the editing tools of the cabinet to all himself. Okay, so we can see that this, the powers as the head of the government is only in question when a cohabitation happens, right? When a cohabitation happens, the president has to sort of sit aside and act as a nominal executive while the prime minister handles the government. But however, even when a cohabitation is in power, right? Even when a cohabitation is in power, as you can see, still officially, the president is officially still considered as head of the government. Prime minister gets to handle everything practically only. Okay, but we had a cohabitation government from 2000 to 2004, while Ranil Wickremesinghe was the president, while Ranil Wickremesinghe was the prime minister, when Chandrika Bandaranaike was president. But this government sort of came to an end because there was an elaborated plan ran by Chandrika Bandaranaike with her trusty friend Mr. Mangala Samaravira. He's the one who had that elaborated plan where the president used her powers to take over 3 cabinet ministries, right? 3 cabinet ministries and topple that Ranil Wickremesinghe's government. Fun fact that that was known as Operation Kottu, because apparently, like, they start planning this at about 9 in the night, and they used to bring Kottu, and they used to discuss tackling, like handling the situation while having Kottu, it seems. So it's known as the Kottu, Operation Kottu. So they did that to topple that cohabitation government. That shows president still holds all these trump cards to handle the government entirely. So the 19th Amendment to 2015, that was the only constitutional amendment that sort of like practically changed and sort of balanced out these powers. Then when you take the president as the chief commanding officer of the armed forces, declaring OMPs, appointing army commander, navy commander, commander of the air force, right? All these top positions and granting honorary medals, all those things, the top decisions of the armed forces are also done by the president. Then in terms of the parliament, when you take parliament into consideration, parliament also president gets to summon and dissolve. He can call and he can conclude, postpone sessions. He can present the policy paper. He chairs the inaugural session of the parliament before the speaker is chosen. So all these important powers are given to the parliament, president over the parliament. President gets to dissolve the parliament, like as long as the parliament has completed 1 year, president can dissolve the parliament whenever he wants. This 1 year period was increased to 4.5 under the 19th Amendment, right? So this shows that the president's powers have completely compromised the power of the parliament. Now, for example, you see in 2004, president dissolved the parliament, like as a result of as a part of that Operation Kottu, right? The last step in Operation Kottu was dissolving the parliament. So Chandrika Bandaranaike dissolved the parliament, and at that time, Ranil Wickremesinghe had a majority of 136. You only need 113 to form a government. Ranil Wickremesinghe had 136. That means he was just 14 members short of a 2/3 majority. This parliament was dissolved by President Chandrika Bandaranaike. It was very unethical at that time, but that was the given power. Okay. Then powers with regard to judiciary, of course, appointing chief justice and other judges, appointing judges to the Court of Appeal. Then sometimes, like based on the recommendation of the Judicial Service Commission, he appoints judges to the High Court, appoints members of the Judicial Service Commission. All those things are done by the president. Then with powers with regard to the referendums, referendums is a new feature introduced under the 1978 Constitution. What a referendum does is, it's a, it's a direct democracy method, right? So, which means the people get an opportunity to pass laws instead of the parliament, okay? So, it is a bold feature, something like a referendum, which normally countries like Switzerland have these kind of direct democracy methods. But what you can see here is that at times president have the power of using referendums as a tool to make himself more powerful. Sometimes when he sort of wants to control the parliament, what he does is, okay, parliament is going to say no to this law, I'll get it passed from the people itself. So he can call for a referendum and get it passed. So much so in Sri Lanka, a referendum can only be called by the president. No other authority can decide to have a referendum. President gets to make the sole call to have a referendum. Article 86 shows that if there's a national importance matter or something like that, president gets to call the referendum. Okay. The only referendum that was held in Sri Lanka was held in 1982. Right, and that referendum was used to postpone an election and extend the term of the parliament. All right, so because the government already had a favorable majority and J.R. Jayawardena didn't want to reduce the number of seats, so this bold democratic feature was used one time for a very undemocratic matter, and that was basically the president using referendums also as a tool to keep his government going. Then powers under emergency situation. If an emergency situation is declared in the country, right, president has the power to overrule any law. Like in case, like if there's like some war or something like that breaks out and there's an emergency situation declared in the country, that means president becomes a solitary source of the law, and he has the power to overrule any law, but excluding the constitution, right? President can't overrule the constitution. But general law, like whatever that is passed by the parliament, president can issue an order and overrule any of the laws passed by the parliament. Okay. So all these powers like show that how the president is the central figure, central authority of the 78 constitution and the level of dominance the president has. All right. And also another thing is the judicial immunity. President has a judicial immunity. That means president can't be sued personally or officially in any courthouse under any accusation, right? Now this is there in other countries as well. Now in USA and all, you can't officially sue the president. If president makes a decision, you can't sue the president for that. But personally, you can. You guys know that there's a US president called Bill Clinton who was sued for sexual misconduct by one of these girls who was an intern in the White House, right? So it turned out to be that the president was sued under personal grounds. Personally, Bill Clinton was sued, not as a president. So in other countries, you can personally sue the president. Officially, you can't. That's understandable, right? But in Sri Lanka, neither personally nor officially, president can be sued. Okay, this shows the level of power the president has and how the power has been centralized at this president's position. Why this constitution is such an unbalanced system? Simply because of the existence of the executive president. Okay, right, which brings us to the arguments for and against. Some people argue these are good position to have. Some people argue these are bad position. So let's discuss that. Before moving on to that, do you guys have any questions, anything to clarify? You can ask. If not, this will be like a small 2 minutes break. Now let's take a look at arguments for and against. Okay, we have a question before that. Who are non-cabinet ministers? Okay, sometimes you can appoint a minister who is not a part of the cabinet. Now there are different types of ministers, right? First of all, you have cabinet ministers. That means the official members of the cabinet who sits with the president and the prime minister and who makes decisions. According to the constitution, you can only have 30. Right? That means president and the prime minister, including them. So 28 presidents only, 28. Okay. So other than that, you can have a deputy minister or a state minister, right? A deputy minister or a state minister who is like basically the name suggests itself, right? Deputy minister. That means like a vice captain sort of position, like a backup minister. Sometimes when it comes to a certain matter, now imagine like a very specific matter. Okay, imagine something like this. You have a sports minister, right? You have a sports minister, but imagine that you have to focus on athletics of the country because you have an Olympic coming up. So you may put a minister of athletics. So he's not a cabinet minister, of course. He's just in charge of athletics, right? So he's the non-cabinet minister of sports who's specifically in charge of athletics. Understand? It was like a temporary minister position. Okay. So there were a lot of non-cabinet ministers during the wartime because people who joined Mahinda's government, everybody wanted a minister position. So our board of ministers, there was like some 100 13 odd ministers were there in our board of ministers at that time. Okay, so let's see. What about these arguments for and against? Now, first of all, the need for a cabinet, a need for a presidential system, a need for a president, executive president in our country came into the discussion by 1960s. This is because in 1960s, Sri Lanka had like two premature government endings, early 60s, right? 1960, we had to have two parliamentary elections because Daddi Senanayaka's government came to an end on the very first day. His policy paper lost. And then Sirima Bandaranaike's government came to an end 4 years or 3 years into her term. So especially Mr. J.R. Jayawardena, who was a big fan of the USA, he saw that USA has an executive president, and he believed that the key to develop Sri Lanka is having a stable executive like that, who does not depend on the legislature, who would not come to a premature ending, who would obviously complete the next, complete the official tenure without premature endings, right? So, which is why this executive president's position was introduced to our country in 1978, the Second Republican Constitution. So some people argue that we need a executive presidential system, executive president, while others point out like the disadvantages and that we should not have this, right? So much so after 1994, in every election, abolishing executive presidency became a topic, right? In 1994, Chandrika Bandaranaike came to power with the promise of abolishing executive presidency. 1999, Chandrika Bandaranaike came to power once again with the promise of abolishing executive presidency. 2005, Ranil Wickremesinghe and Mahinda Rajapaksa both came to election promising to get rid of executive presidency. 2010, Sarath Fonseka contested with the promise to get rid of executive presidency. 2015, Maithripala Sirisena, his main slogan was getting rid of executive presidency. But it hasn't been taken off. And this is one of the main arguments in Sri Lanka in recent years, recent few decades, whether Sri Lanka wants an executive presidency or not, has been a topic, so most talked about, one of the most talked about topics. Okay. Right. So let's see the arguments for and against. Even if you get this as a question even if you get this as a question as advantages and disadvantages of the executive president, it's pretty much the same. Okay. Now, once again, just to mention, if you have properly understood this lesson, if you were paying attention and focusing to whatever we studied thus far, so we have completed executive president's position in the 78 Constitution, which means like pretty much half the lesson is done, half the unit is done. If you understood, if you focused on whatever we studied thus far, if you paid attention, these advantages and disadvantages should automatically make sense to you. Okay, right. So let's read and go through this and find out what these mean. Okay, right. Tasha, will you be able to read? Does your mic work? Will you be able to read? Should I get someone else? All right, Nashida, what about you? Someone else, maybe? Ishma?
Okay, sir. Arguments for and against the executive president. Following independence, Sri Lanka adopted a cabinet format government following the British tradition. However, following many premature government collapses in early 1960s, the political instability of the cabinet system was heavily criticized. By late 1960s, the necessity for the stable executive became a mainstream topic in day-to-day politics. As a result, in 1978, the Second Republican Constitution introduced a position of the executive president with an extreme centralization of powers. This position has been argued for and against in Sri Lankan politics for a long time. Argument 4. Powerful and stable executive. Given the political history of Sri Lanka, where many governments suffered from political instability, the executive president has provided a reasonable stability to Sri Lankan government since 1978. The ability of the president to make stern decisions. In practical politics of Sri Lanka, many examples can be found in instances of the president making stern decisions despite receiving resistance from other authorities of the government. For example, signing the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord in 1987, last few years of the civil war can be pointed out. The executive being external and independent from the legislature. Since the 1978 constitution features a semi-presidential format, the president and the parliament were chosen in two separate elections. Therefore, the president exists outside the legislature, which protects the concept of separation of powers. The president representing the entire country. Unlike in a cabinet system, where the prime minister is simply representing one electorate, the president is elected through an island-wide election where the entire country is considered as a solitary electorate. Therefore, in order to win this election, the president has to address the entire nation and all ethnicities, providing solidarity to a multi-party system. Sri Lanka has a multi-party system with two dominant parties. Therefore, often in legislature, political parties struggle to secure the necessary majority to form a government. This results in coalitions which create further political instability. The position of the executive president provides a certain level of political stability to Sri Lanka's political party system. The national leadership being relatively free from party politics. Unlike a prime minister who has to maintain collective responsibility within a political party, a president doesn't depend on the political party compositions in the parliament. Therefore, a president can provide a national leadership which is independent from political parties. This has encouraged more independent and common candidates to run in presidential elections. For example, Sarath Fonseka in 2010 and Maithripala Sirisena in 2015 can be pointed out.
Right, okay. So let's discuss about the arguments for, right? Why do people argue that we need an executive president in our country, right? First things first, it's about like stability, right? Sri Lanka does not have the most stable political system in the world. Now, as we discussed before, even in 1960s, where J.R. Jayawardena came and suggested this system was because our country had a problem of political instability, right? Which is why that they suggested an executive president who cannot be removed by just people jumping to this side to that side in the parliament. That's what happens to a prime minister, because if some people in the legislature switches their sides and the prime minister loses the majority support, prime minister has to go home. But the president provides some stability, though there's kind of political drama, can't take a president outside the position, right? Then the president's ability to make stern decisions. Okay, so the best examples would be like when Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord was signed in 1987. Pretty much most of the people weren't in favor. Like he didn't have a lot of support from his own government. His own prime minister was against it, right? Also, the last few years of civil war, when Mahinda Rajapaksa was fighting the civil war last few years, he had a lot of political backlash coming. Right, but given the fact that he didn't have to worry much about the content in the parliament, given that he had executive powers, in both instances, the executive went ahead without any issues. Very stern decisions were made despite having a lot of controversy and political backlash. Then executive being external and independent from the legislature, right? So the legislature sort of like being excluded, right? And the president coming to power from outside and existing outside protects the concept of separation of powers. So there's some application of separation of powers when you have an executive president in action, right? Then, of course, we know president represents the entire country because the president wins an election where throughout the entire country, right? Gotabaya Rajapaksa, he was voted by everyone in the country. At least he contested everywhere in the country to make sure that he won an election from the entire country. Comparing to that, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa was only voted by people in Kurunegala, right? That means people only in a district have voted for members in the parliament. All right. Then it does provide a solidarity to the multi-party system because multi-party system is somewhat problematic. because Sri Lanka has a multi-party system, quite often these, coalitions and stuff occur quite often. So that creates political instability, right? When a coalition happens, when you have many parties in the same coalition, and sometimes some parties pull out, some parties don't really cooperate. But none of those things matter when you have a solidarity president with solidarity, right? Then, of course, the fact that there is a national level leadership provided, right? So that is excluded from party politics. Now, for you to be the prime minister, you need to have political party support. You need to have a political party support if you want to be a prime minister. Why? Because you need to have more people. You need to have the confidence of members of the parliament. Then only you get to be the prime minister, as long as you have majority support. But a solitary person can be a presidential candidate and win the presidential election, and then after that you don't necessarily need a political party's endorsement. For example, like how Sarath Fonseca ran in 2010, he wasn't neither a member of UNP nor JVP, but he was endorsed by parties and he was not representing a party. Same went with Maithripala Sirisena, who contested in 2015, and he was neither a member of UNP or any of these parties, but he was also supported by, which is why they were known as the common candidates. They were common candidates, right? So you don't have to be coming from a party to contest in the presidential election. So those are the arguments for. This is why some people suggest, having an executive president is good. All right. So let's see why some people argue this is bad. Okay. Right, Hishma, please continue.
Arguments against extreme centralized powers of the position. As we discussed earlier in the lesson, the President of Sri Lanka has extreme powers as the head of the state, head of the government, head of the executive, as well as the head of the commanding officer of armed forces. The extreme powers of the president have allowed him to dominate the parliament, the rest of the cabinet, the judiciary, and even the public sector. Judicial immunity. The 1978 Constitution has provided judicial immunity to the president on official and personal grounds. This is a violation of rule of law in Sri Lanka. The removal method. According to the Constitution, the only available method to remove the president before the completion of the term is by passing an impeachment motion. However, as it was discussed before in this lesson, the impeachment process is practically impossible. Lack of responsibility. The president is not responsible to the parliament, unlike a prime minister. Although the Article 42 of the Constitution provides that the president is responsible to the parliament, there is no available practical mechanism to put that responsibility into effect. The president having the final call in many areas of the government. In terms of calling, postponing, and dissolving the parliament, appointing commissions, calling referendums, and even deciding governmental policies, the president has a final decision-making power. Therefore, it can be seen that the president handles the steering wheel of the country solely by himself.
Right. So these are the reasons. Now, keep in mind, guys, this is not an exclusive list. There can be more arguments for the president and more arguments against the president. I've just gathered the most mainstream ones. First of all, obviously, as we just saw in the previous lesson, that there is an extreme centralization of powers, like an unbalanced way of centralized powers. The president is way too powerful, whereas the parliament, the rest of the cabinet, the judiciary, the public sector, everything is dominated by the president. So the centralization of the powers of the position is problematic. Now, some have suggested, so perhaps just minimize, like reduce the centralization of powers and keep the president's position. That's what they did in the 19th Amendment in 2015. Although, like Maithripala Sirisena came to power and his main slogan was getting rid of executive presidency and retiring. That's what he suggested. He said that I will get rid of executive presidency and I will retire from politics and I will go to my hometown in Polonnaruwa. That's what he said. But that was instead of getting rid of the position, what he did was passing 19th Amendment and reducing the powers of the president. So that was something, right? Like, if you can't get to the president's position, at least reduce some of the powers. That's what was done in the 19th Amendment. Then the judicial immunity is a problem, that the president not being able to be sued, that officially and personally. So this is a violation of rule of law in Sri Lanka, because rule of law means under the law, rule of law, okay, not rule of war. There's a typo. Rule of law. It's a violation of rule of law in Sri Lanka. That means that the ruler and the ruled both should be equal before the law, and that doesn't happen in our country, and that is a problem. Then the removal method. There was one lesson that we went through this, and we saw how difficult the removal method is. It's crazy how long the method is. You have to get it signed by half, then the speaker has to approve it, then it goes in the agenda, then it requires a 2/3 majority approval, then it goes to the Supreme Court, and then it has to come back, and then you need another 2/3 approval. So this is practically impossible. So some suggest that we don't need a position with a removal process, which is like practically impossible, right? Then lack of responsibility is another problem. Now, when it comes to a prime minister is responsible to the parliament, right? Because the moment the prime minister loses that responsibility, the moment the prime minister does not act with proper responsibility, what happens? Prime minister loses the support of the parliament and he is fired practically. Prime minister is removed. But we can see that a president is not responsible to the parliament like that, because the president does not depend on the support of the parliament. Article 42 of the Constitution says that the president is responsible to the parliament, but it just says that the president is responsible. It is not provided how to take this responsibility, right? There's no practical available mechanism provided as to how to take this responsibility into effect, right? It's another reason people argue against the executive president. Also, the fact that the president gets to make the final call in most of the things, right? So when it comes to calling, postponing, dissolving the parliament, president makes a final choice. Appointing whatever the commissions, president makes a final choice. Calling a referendum, president makes the only choice, not just the final. He's the only person who can call a referendum. And even deciding government policies, president makes a final decision. So it shows that the president practically handles the steering wheel of the country, and rest of the government is just useless. And people suggest that having such a position to a country is not good, such an unbalance of power. So some people suggest that we need to get rid of this executive president's position. Okay, right. Right, we have a question. So president having the highest power, can he stop the impeachment motion which is against him? That's a good question. If the president is having an impeachment motion going against him, now first of all, it's practically impossible to go through an impeachment process. It's so long, and it's nearly impossible to actually do an impeachment, get through an impeachment. But let's say someone starts the impeachment process. Can the president stop? Now, first things first, president can't dissolve the parliament if there is an impeachment included in the agenda. Okay, so you remember the impeachment has to be signed by at least half the members, or 2/3 of the members, right? If it is signed by 2/3 of the members, president, the speaker has to include that in the agenda. And if it is signed by half of the members, the speaker has to decide. If the speaker is satisfied, only the speaker would include that. Okay. Now, that means the president has time, like, it's going to take some time to gather the accusations and evidence against the president and draft the impeachment, then hand it over to the speaker, and for the speaker to accept that or like put that in the agenda. So during that time, president can dissolve the parliament. So that's the end of the story. Impeachment is no more. Okay. So the president can't dissolve the parliament only when it's included in the agenda. So he has enough time to dissolve the parliament before impeachment is included in the agenda, right? Now, let's say you somehow do include that in the agenda. Then what happens? Then the president can't dissolve the parliament, but the president can postpone the parliament, right? So the president can postpone the parliament for 2 months. So during that 2 months, president can get ready to tackle that impeachment. First of all, president can talk to members of the parliament one by one and convince them not to vote against him in the impeachment. Now that's what practically happened. There was one time an impeachment was brought up against President Ranasinghe Premadasa, and the speaker did include that in the agenda. So president couldn't dissolve the parliament. President postponed the parliament for 2 months. And he practically spoke to each and every member of the parliament one by one and convinced them not to vote against it. So that's one way of tackling, right? Or the president can use that 2 months to get ready for the Supreme Court hearing, right? Because even if it is passed in the parliament, the Supreme Court has to hear it as a case. And then Supreme Court has to give a decision saying president is guilty of those charges. Right, so the president can get his lawyers and get ready to tackle that in the parliament. So yes, president he can't like stop the impeachment, but he can use tactics. Either he can dissolve the parliament before it is included in the agenda. Once it is included in the agenda, the president can postpone the parliament and talk to members of the parliament one by one. Or else he can actually get ready for a legal battle by getting his lawyers sorted, right? So those are the ways for a president to tackle an impeachment. Okay. All right. That was a question. That's pretty much it for this part.